She had been told to stay behind the flight cordon, to keep her calm, silent, and to wait for further instruction. No one addressed her by name. No one expected her to speak. Around her, pilots reviewed mission profiles and prepped for a high-level joint exercise. She was there only to monitor an old aircraft no one thought would ever leave the ground. Near the back edge of the operations lot, far from the noise and nods, that single aircraft sat in shadow, its skin dulled to a flat gray, the decals sun-bleached. The airframe older than half the people on base. The F-14 Tomcat had no crew working around it, no cables snaked from its undercarriage, no checklist hung from its frame. Only one woman stood beside it, tugging on a pressure line with one gloved hand and leaning into the wing root with the other. Her flight suit had faded in places, the elbow seams pale and softened from use. Her name tag was barely legible, its stitching curled at the edges. "Excuse me," a voice called from behind her. A younger man, maybe in his late 20s, leaned halfway out of a golf cart, his uniform spotless. "Is this for display or something?" He gestured towards the aircraft with his chin, chewing on a plastic straw. "I thought these were retired like 20 years ago." Astrid Larson didn't answer right away. She secured the panel gently and closed it without looking back. The man waited another beat before adding, "Weird spot to park museum pieces," then drove off, leaving behind a trail of laughter aimed at someone on the passenger side. But when an unidentified contact broke protocol and none of the newer jets could respond, someone finally looked her way. Not with respect, not yet, just confusion and a hint of hesitation. And then everything changed. Could this museum piece and its quiet pilot take down the fastest threat the sky had ever seen? Or was her real mission to remind a forgotten world that true power doesn't always need a spotlight to shine? Astrid watched the newer jets lift off, their takeoff sounding like thunder rolling low across the horizon. Perfect posture, tight angles, beautiful arc. None of those pilots had ever flown without assistance overlays. Most had never even seen an analog threat map. Everything now was synced, handed off, and filtered through threat recognition AI. The sky had become a network, not a place. Her aircraft, an old F-14 Tomcat, had no onboard uplink, no predictive lock. Its radar was older than most of the coders who wrote for the new squadrons, but it still worked. You just had to know how to listen. Her call sign, Drift, hadn't been spoken aloud in years, yet she still knew the sky, even if the room didn't know her. As panic swelled in the command center and modern systems failed, Astrid didn't hesitate, because sometimes the sky doesn't care what you fly, only whether you know how. And in that moment, when the noise collapsed, her silent wings were ready to dance. The Guam Air Base shimmered under a punishing sun, its concrete apron stretching wide beneath clouds that seemed to refuse to cast shade. Polished fighter jets lined the tarmac in gleaming formation, each one newer than the last, wrapped in fresh paint and flanked by multinational crews in mirrored sunglasses and crisp flight suits. The morning was already thick with the scent of fuel and the echo of drills. Cadences shouted in English, French, Korean. Commanders walked shoulder to shoulder with camera crews, pausing now and then for perfectly framed interviews, while sponsor banners flapped in the coastal wind. Near the back edge of the operations lot, far from the noise and nods, a single aircraft sat in shadow. Its skin was dulled to a flat gray, the decals sun-bleached, the airframe older than half the people on base. The F-14 Tomcat had no crew working around it, no cables snaked from its undercarriage, no checklist hung from its frame. Only one woman stood beside it, Astrid Larson, tugging on a pressure line with one gloved hand and leaning into the wing root with the other. Her flight suit had faded in places, the elbow seams pale and softened from use. Her name tag was barely legible, its stitching curled at the edges. Her helmet rested nearby, its surface dulled and scratched. A long faded sticker on the back that once read Drift was barely visible. Astrid didn't rush. She adjusted the line again, checked the rear panel, and ran her hand along the metal lip of the intake, as if listening. There were no spectators, no command clipboard. She didn't need one. The radar unit had been humming wrong on startup the day before, and she could feel the residual tension in the housing. She opened the side panel and tuned the analog dial by instinct, her thumb brushing the dial slowly. To anyone passing by, it would have looked like a technician double-checking a maintenance spec. No one saw the nuance in the pressure she applied to the manual calibration wheel. No one noticed the way she blinked twice to time the sweep. "Excuse me," a voice called from behind her. It was Lieutenant Miles Holloway, a younger pilot, perhaps in his late 20s, leaning halfway out of a golf cart, his uniform spotless. "Is this for display or something?" He gestured towards the aircraft with his chin, chewing on a plastic straw. "I thought these were retired like 20 years ago." Astrid didn't answer right away. She secured the panel gently and closed it without looking back. Miles waited another beat before adding, "Weird spot to park museum pieces," then drove off, leaving behind a trail of laughter aimed at someone on the passenger side. Astrid pulled off her glove and wiped a bit of grease from the edge of the panel. Her fingers were quiet and steady. She reached down for her helmet and checked the chin strap, more out of habit than need. The buckle clicked twice, and then she set it aside again. In the distance, a fresh round of jets lifted off the main runway. Their takeoff sounded like thunder rolling low across the horizon, amplified through the headset chatter of control crews. Astrid watched their climb through the glare. Perfect posture, tight angles, beautiful arcs. It seemed unlikely that any of those pilots had ever flown without assistance overlays. Most, it appeared, had never even seen an analog threat map. Everything now was synced, handed off, and filtered through threat recognition AI. The sky had become a network, not a place. She turned back to the Tomcat. Her aircraft had no onboard uplink, no predictive lock. The radar was older than most of the coders who wrote for the new squadrons, but it still worked. You just had to know how to listen. Someone passed behind her saying something about lunch rotation. Another voice called out from the command tent to check telemetry loads. Her name wasn't listed. Her call sign, Drift, hadn't been spoken aloud in years. There was a photo taped inside the Tomcat's cockpit. It had yellowed along the corners. A younger Astrid stood next to the same aircraft, hand resting on the ladder rail, smiling beneath a helmet. Around her, the rest of the flight crew leaned against the intake, sunburned and laughing. Their call signs were written in ink on the back. Drift, Scope, Mule, Reap. Only one of those names still walked this airfield, and no one knew it was hers. She closed the side panel with a clean snap, then picked up her checklist. It was mostly blank. They hadn't scheduled the F-14 for anything beyond a photo op with visiting officers. No drills, no simulations. The aircraft had flown only 31 minutes in the last year, just enough to keep the hydraulics honest. But Astrid still ran her system sweep every week. She still hand-tracked the calibration bands, and every time she looked at the radar, she remembered how the sweep had once sounded when it echoed against an enemy arc. She remembered because no one else did. Sometimes she thought it was better to be forgotten than to be remembered wrong. And sometimes perhaps the sky didn't care what you flew, only whether you knew how. The main hangar buzzed with overlapping voices and a synthetic glow. Flat panel maps refreshed every few seconds across the back wall, slicing the Pacific Theater into clean grids of color-coded threat zones. A live sim replay ran on the side screen, showing 3 Super Hornets peeling off formation with a precision that earned a round of applause. At the center table, a Navy lieutenant leaned over a tablet, tapping coordinates, while a French squadron leader translated callouts for his team beside him. Everyone wore flight gear. Everyone had somewhere to be. Astrid stood at the far edge of the group, a half step outside the light. Her flight suit bore the same insignia, but lacked the sharp creases and badge cluster of those around her. The room smelled like coffee, sweat, and new nylon. No one greeted her. She didn't expect them to. A digital manifest rotated on a side monitor. Call signs scrolled in pairs. Vapor 1, Icefield, Falcon 3. Astrid's name wasn't listed. Her aircraft wasn't listed. It hadn't been for years. She held a folded radar chart in one hand, the edges worn soft from use. She waited until a pause broke in the room's noise, then took a measured breath and stepped forward. Her voice wasn't raised, it didn't need to be. "There's a lateral echo on the vector edge this morning," she stated calmly. "The drift band on the northern segment has widened by 0.5. If anyone's pulling long on that flank, they'll need to recalculate delay before handoff." Heads turned for a moment. The French captain blinked. Lieutenant Miles Holloway barely glanced up from his screen. Then a younger American pilot, tall and sharp-jawed, chuckled lightly and raised his chin without looking at her. "We're good, ma'am. The encrypted handoff system adjusts in real time now." He said it with a smile, not a sneer, as if offering help to someone who had stumbled into the wrong briefing. Another voice followed from across the table. "Appreciate the heads up, but we've moved past manual fixes. Autosync does all that now. You can check the digital feed near Bay 5. Astrid nodded once. She didn't argue. She slipped the chart back into her pocket without comment. The paper felt soft against her palm, its corners creased from years of flight without assistance overlays. As the briefing resumed, someone from the back leaned toward the projector and murmured to his teammate, not quietly enough, "She's still flying that antique. Pretty sure it belongs in a documentary." Laughter fluttered through the group, not cruel perhaps, but casual, well-fed, the kind of laughter that didn't need to feel malicious to wound. An officer walked by and handed Astrid a clipboard without even looking. "Could you confirm the Bay 3 loadout?" he asked. "We had a spare crew slot fall through." She took it silently. The manifest was typed in clean black rose. Her name wasn't on it. There were slots for 8 airframes in tomorrow's rotation, all newer than her bird by at least 2 decades. She flipped the page and scanned the fuel weights. Not her job, but she noted 2 inconsistencies out of habit. Across the room, someone adjusted the targeting overlay on the digital display and joked about how the F-14 wouldn't know what to do without a VHS manual. Another chuckled that the cockpit probably ran on static and coffee. No one corrected them. Astrid walked to the sideboard and poured a cup of water. The plastic crinkled slightly in her hand. Her reflection in the side screen was faint. Helmet under one arm, eyes unreadable. No one stopped talking. No one turned to look. Later in the adjacent hangar, she clipped her tools back onto the side rack. Her aircraft sat with its canopy sealed, its tail in the shadow of a younger jet, prepped for the next sim. A junior pilot passed by, glanced toward the Tomcat, then looked at her as if trying to place her role. "You crew on this?" he asked. Astrid replied without inflection. "You could say that." He nodded absently and kept walking, already talking into his headset. She reached into the open panel of the radar unit and adjusted the analog dial by feel. It clicked once. The frequency hummed clean. She sat for a moment on the lower rail of the boarding ladder. The sun hit the edge of the wing at an angle that made the scratches look like topography. Her glove rested across her knee, a faint grease mark running down the middle. There used to be a board in the command hallway with pilot call signs written in chalk. Hers had been third from the top for 2 years. Drift. She had traced the curve of the letter D with her fingertip every morning before takeoff. The board was gone now. A digital display looped in its place. She wasn't in the loop. She didn't need to be. They had erased her call-out frequency, but she remembered the air itself. Not the version rendered in blue on a tablet, but the one that moved against your ribcage when you banked just under cloud level. She remembered the drift of heat past the nose cone, the press of altitude, the telltale flick of an intercept shadow when it split your echo in 2. She still knew the sky even if the room didn't know her. The alert came in just before 18 heaven hours. A priority flag flared across the command monitors, flashing red against the blue grid lines of the wargame display. At first, no one moved. The simulations had run clean all day. F-35s performing showcase intercepts, international squadrons rotating through scenarios with near-perfect execution. But this marker wasn't simulated. It didn't match any training profile. It moved too fast, too erratically. Its altitude band shifted in half-second intervals inside the control center. A young lieutenant squinted at the screen and called for a manual refresh. The icon blinked, vanished, then reappeared 70 miles northwest, traveling at speeds well above the exercise ceiling. A second later, encrypted comms filled with chatter. One of the South Korean pilots confirmed the same contact on a local scope. French radar caught it on a sweep echo, but lost it just as fast. Someone asked if it was a drone from the next phase. Another suggested it might be a stealth test bird, running dark. Then everything started to glitch. Tracking feeds stuttered. Heads-up displays froze mid-handshake. One of the lead F-35s banked hard into evasive posture without warning, claiming a lock warning had flared and disappeared. Ground crews pulled their eyes from the monitors and turned toward the bay. The sky, which had been quiet and orderly for hours, now hummed with static across the lot. Inside the Tomcat hangar, Astrid stood alone. Her aircraft rested in profile against the open shutter, framed by the soft gold of the late sun. She wasn't on any roster. She had no brief, no live feed. But her own radar, wired analog grounded to an independent console, was alive. The display glowed faint green across her chart, its single sweep line cutting a slow rhythm. It showed what the new systems couldn't: a repeated arc just beyond the edge of the projected corridor, curving in a way that didn't match any known asset. She didn't panic. She watched it twice, then reached for her chart. A red pencil mark already traced the band of instability from 2 days earlier. Subtle drift in a vector lane no one else had bothered to log. She overlaid the current pattern. It matched. The radar sweep blinked once. Astrid tightened her glove strap. Then she turned. No one called her name. No klaxon sounded for her aircraft. The flight line teams were frozen, arguing over system errors and fallback protocols. Astrid stepped toward the Tomcat ladder. Her boots rang against the grated stair. A tech caught sight of her and jogged over, confusion in his voice. "Ma'am, you're not cleared for flight. They haven't even spun you up for live posture." She didn't stop moving. "I don't need clearance," she said. "I have a lock." He blinked, trying to form a response. But by then she was already in the cockpit, flipping the master panel switch. The old engine systems groaned once, then kicked into life with a deep rumble that turned every head nearby. The F-14's roar wasn't smooth like the others. It was lower, guttural, imperfect, but rising with unmistakable intent. The control tower didn't issue a green light. No deck crew rolled into position, but Astrid taxied cleanly to the edge of the lot, ignoring the trailing voices behind her. In the distance, 2 aircraft passed overhead, chasing a ghost they couldn't lock. The sun had dipped low enough that the upper clouds glowed amber. Astrid checked her systems manually. No uplink, no threat recognition, just her, the radar echo, and the flight instincts no one had asked for in years. She aligned the Tomcat to the outbound lane. Her helmet settled against the seat, the padding worn thin where it met her temple. The sticker on the back, faded red with black ink, still bore her call sign, Drift. She pushed the throttle. The F-14 launched into the evening air with a shudder that nearly buckled the pavement beneath it. A few techs stumbled back from the edge of the blast radius. Inside the tower, someone shouted to identify the aircraft. Another voice said her name, uncertain, but no one could reach her now. Her comms weren't synced to the exercise net. She climbed steadily, banking into the predicted intercept up. The newer fighters couldn't follow. They were busy recalibrating systems that had already failed. Astrid wasn't calibrating. She was flying. The radar echo appeared again. Astrid read its speed, not from numbers, but from how fast the wake blurred behind its last position. She eased the nose of the Tomcat into a turn most wouldn't dare without simulation clearance. No one issued her parameters. No one told her what to do. She followed the pattern just like she always had. The F-14 bucked slightly as Astrid climbed into the thinning air above Guam's southern corridor. The sound inside the cockpit was thick with engine pressure and metal vibration, a harmonic groan that settled deep into her chest and warned her of every shift in stress. Nothing about the flight felt smooth, but it felt right. Her instruments flickered in soft green, glowing through scratches earned from decades of use. There was no heads-up display, no terrain overlays, just steel, dials, and memory. The Tomcat crept toward its ceiling with determined strain. She adjusted the throttle with a worn glove grip, fingertips brushing the throttle arm's polished arc, smoothed from years of pressure. The altimeter ticked upward in clean mechanical rhythm. Her helmet sat heavy against the headrest. Every breath she drew echoed faintly against the canopy glass. Far ahead, beyond visual range, the unidentified object arced again. It didn't fly like a jet. It didn't level, didn't hold altitude, didn't climb in traditional patterns. It flickered, disappearing, reappearing, crossing lanes at impossible angles. She couldn't hear it, couldn't lock onto it by standard signal, but she saw the disturbance. The wake signature wasn't something you could fabricate. It tore into the sky with speed that pushed against comprehension, but it left fingerprints, heat bloom over cold layers, vortices collapsing into each other, ghost trails that didn't match any known propulsion. Astrid tilted the radar screen slightly and narrowed the sweep band. She ran the dial by feel, counting the timing under her breath. 1, 2, 2, 1, 6, 3. On the fourth pass, the line blinked weakly. Not a signal, just a shadow. She let the plane settle into trim, then tapped the stick right and slid slightly out of lane. No orders came through. Her comm remained on a local loop, untuned to any active control tower. A few voices tried to ping her across shared bands, but their encrypted links couldn't match. She wasn't in their net. She flew beneath it. The Tomcat wobbled gently in cross-current, stabilizers catching pressure at different rates. She adjusted without thinking. Her body leaned half a degree before the aircraft responded. They moved together, old partners in familiar silence. She'd flown this jet in weather so thick it blinded the tower. She'd once landed on deck without instruments when the carrier systems cut out. That was years ago. The plane remembered. So did she. She angled toward the arc. It was cutting toward open ocean now, climbing fast, nearly vertical. No pilot would do that. No human one, which, she reasoned, meant it wouldn't respond like a pilot would either. Astrid checked the wind against her outer sensors, watching the left side panel for distortion. A cold spiral pushed back. She banked left anyway. Her vision narrowed. She wasn't flying by markers. She was flying by shape. The curve of the trail, the rate at which the wake folded in on itself. She remembered what her old instructor had once said during early training over the Rockies. Don't chase the shape, fly where it has to breathe. That was exactly what she did. She dropped the throttle just enough to match the descent arc that would meet it at intercept. Then she climbed again, not directly behind the object, but to where its wake would force it to stabilize, if only for a second. The climb wasn't graceful. The Tomcat shuddered, old engines howling, panels rattling along the canopy edge. Astrid didn't flinch. The object flickered again, ghosting into a drift across band 3. She saw it just long enough to know it was real. Not a ghost signal, not a shadow. Some kind of drone, maybe hypersonic, maybe autonomous, perhaps something no one would admit to logging. But it was flying dirty, it was breaking rules, and it was beatable. She eased the stick forward, holding the slight angle. The Tomcat dropped altitude, held for 3 seconds, then pulled again. Her eyes tracked the spiral. She didn't blink. At the top of the climb, she rolled 90 degrees, rotated the wing line, and caught it. The lock tone didn't chirp. There was no digital beep, just a faint buzz, analog and sharp. Like a fly trapped under glass, she reached for the trigger. The missile, ready, she whispered to herself. 2, 3. She fired. The missile streaked from beneath the wing with no ceremony, no contrail, no celebration. It cut a line straight into the sky. She didn't watch it hit. She stayed in the roll, easing out of the climb and leveling her wings as the Tomcat shook with relief. The air around her steadied. The turbulence dropped. 2 seconds later, the flash appeared on her rear band, a soft light far off. Then nothing. She breathed out once. In the silence that followed, the sky settled. The radar sweep looped clean. No echo, no shape, no distortion. Astrid reset her trim and turned for home. Below, the other fighters circled without answers. Some were still rerouting systems, others searching for the missing contact. Control towers tried to re-establish this. None had tracked the shot. The object had vanished from their screens before they ever caught it. But Astrid hadn't tracked it. She had flown its breath. The Tomcat descended slowly through the upper haze, her glide path clean, her instruments silent in the fading light, the cockpit dim to deep amber. She adjusted her grip on the stick and reached over to tap the throttle. It still responded like it always had. No one cheered. No command voice came through. She didn't need either. She had done what the others couldn't, not because she had better tech, but because she had no tech at all. She had flown like she remembered. The Tomcat came down slow, deliberate, its descent visible from nearly every corner of the base. Engines throttled low, flaps extended, nose tilted just enough to suggest confidence rather than aggression. The runway shimmered beneath it, heat still rising from the earlier sorties. No tower voice guided her in. No marshal cleared her approach. She aligned by instinct, adjusting pitch with smooth input and soft pressure. The landing gear touched down with a short groan and a visible bounce. Rubber met concrete and left twin marks that trailed behind her like a signature. Inside the control tower, no one spoke. The base radar showed only one aircraft in final approach. A line technician whispered to his co-worker, asking if her frequency had ever been authorized. The supervisor said nothing, his eyes fixed on the descending blip. The F-14 slowed, air brakes unfolding with a hiss of mechanical age. The tail rocked once before settling. It rolled to a stop just past the taxi split where the light changed from red to amber. The canopy remained closed for a beat longer than usual. Then it cracked, hissed open, and Astrid emerged. She moved with unhurried precision, every action measured. Her helmet came off first. She set it on the seat back, visor facing out. The sticker, old, sun-worn, barely legible, still bore her call sign Drift. She pulled her gloves free next, tugging at the frayed seam on her left hand. Then she stepped down the ladder slowly, her boots hitting the metal rungs without sound. Across the flight line, movement had stopped. Ground crews stood beside power carts and tool rigs, unsure whether to continue working or just watch. A group of pilots had gathered outside the briefing tent, their posture stiff, arms crossed or hanging awkwardly. One of them, Lieutenant Miles Holloway, had been part of the earlier sim rotation. His sunglasses hung from the collar of his vest. Forgotten. He said nothing as Astrid passed. She didn't look at any of them. Her stride was quiet, unassuming. She reached the edge of the pad and unzipped the top half of her flight suit to the waist, tying the sleeves in a loose knot as the wind caught the fabric behind her. She exhaled once through her nose and adjusted the strap on her belt. The crew chief assigned to Bay 3 had jogged over mid-landing, expecting to challenge the return, but now he just stood with his headset slung around his neck, uncertain. In the tower, the radar tech leaned over to one of the watch officers and spoke under his breath. What protocol was that? The officer, older, a former pilot, didn't answer immediately. His fingers hovered over the replay feed. The blip showed the intercept arc again, clean, impossible, outside every prediction model. He watched the maneuver twice before replying, eyes still on the screen. There isn't one, he said quietly. She flew it like they used to. The words carried no resentment, no judgment, just recognition. Back on the ground, the heat swirled off the tarmac in slow waves. Astrid walked past a line of pilots without a word. One of them, a junior from the Brazilian detachment, stepped back unconsciously, almost as if giving space to something he didn't yet understand. A few others followed suit. The air between them shifted, no longer casual, no longer superior, just still. Julian Harrow stood near the press tent, arms folded, his polished shoes dusted with gravel. Valerie Knox lowered her tablet. The media rig sat idle. Astrid paused briefly by the tool cart, unsnapped the flap on her flight log, and slid her hand inside. She did not write anything. She simply checked that the book was there, then closed the flap again. The Tomcat stood behind her, engines ticking. As they cooled, the paint caught the late light just enough to throw a soft gleam across its wings. No one else touched it. No one gave orders to move it. Someone had marked a cone off its nose, standard procedure for parking something long retired. It remained in place, untouched. The entire aircraft now seemed like something that had just emerged from a different era, not obsolete, but unexplainable. Astrid stepped up to the water cooler near Hangar 2, filled a paper cup, and drank slowly. Her shoulders eased back. She was not tired, but she felt the full weight of having proven something no one had asked for. A young airman approached, paused, then seemed to think better of it. He backed away before speaking. She did not notice, or maybe she did, and simply chose not to respond. Near the tower, the radar screens looped through updated feeds. The object she had intercepted was no longer listed. It hadn't been identified. There was no data packet attached to it. Only one line had been logged under event tracking. Single asset intercept. No manifest origin. Confirmed neutralization. Astrid walked back to the shaded edge of the hangar, where her helmet still sat on the step rail of the Tomcat. She picked it up and looked briefly at the visor. It reflected the runway, the tower, and the edges of the crowd that still lingered. She clipped the helmet to her belt and sat on the crate beside the wing strut. Nothing about her posture invited comment. Nothing about her expression demanded recognition. That was what made it resonate. No salute, no press statement, no medal ceremony. Just the undeniable truth of what had been done. She didn't need them to say it. She had flown, and they had seen. That was enough. The hangar was nearly empty by the time Astrid returned. The sun had dropped low enough that only the tops of the aircraft caught the light, glowing faintly against the steel beams overhead. The noise from the flight line had faded into quiet footfalls, and the low hum of power units spooling down. She stepped through the side entrance, still in her flight suit, and peeled off her gloves one finger at a time. A young pilot stood near the maintenance rack, shifting his weight from one boot to the other. His posture was straight, but not stiff. He looked as though he'd been waiting, unsure whether he should speak. When he finally did, his voice was quiet. "I saw your track," he said, referring to the tower feed. "You rolled 90 into the arc." He hesitated, glancing at her hands. No HUD, no uplink, just the radar sweep. Astrid folded the gloves and set them on the crate beside her helmet. She met his gaze without tension. "You don't always need to see the whole picture," she said. "Sometimes you just fly the part that matters." The pilot nodded, absorbing the answer without challenge. He looked down at the deck, then back at her once more before stepping aside. She didn't watch him go. She picked up a rag from the bench and began wiping down the edge of her helmet, moving with the same care she had shown the jet. Her corner of the hangar was unchanged, tools still aligned, paper log untouched. She marked a single line on the sheet and left it at that. No one had asked for a debrief. No one had scheduled a report. The action had already spoken louder than any form. By the time she returned to her quarters, the base had gone still. Her room was small, a rectangular cinder block shape softened only by a rug, and the faint smell of cedar oil from a strip beneath the window. She flicked on the desk lamp and unzipped her flight suit halfway, letting it hang loose around her waist. The light caught a photo taped flat to the desk surface. 4 pilots stood under a tarmac awning with their helmets in hand, all younger than Astrid, second from the left, grinned without reservation. The name Drift had been written in pen just below her boot line. She sat in the chair, slow and even, and placed her helmet on the shelf beside her cot. Her logbook sat on the lower ledge, corners worn, spine creased from use. She didn't open it, just placed one hand on the cover, then left it alone. The room didn't carry medals, no framed citations, just one embroidered patch from her old squadron pinned above the desk lamp. The thread faded to gray. The base was quiet long into the night. She slept easily. At dawn, the hangar crew returned to find the Tomcat already pulled forward on its tow rig. A fresh can of flat paint sat open beside the ladder. The crew chief, silent but deliberate, had taped a stencil onto the fuselage just beneath the canopy line. No one announced it, no one asked permission, but by 70 hours, the letters had dried into place. Drift. Just one word. No rank, no decoration. A name that didn't need to explain itself. Pilots walking past the bay slowed their pace. A few stopped altogether, pausing to look at the name. Some smiled faintly. 1 or 2 lowered their gaze and kept walking. Astrid arrived half an hour later, coffee in one hand, clipboard in the other. She paused when she saw the paint, but only for a second. Her expression didn't shift. She reached out once to test the edge with her fingertip, clean, dry, solid, then continued on. She didn't mention it to anyone. Later that day, she ran a diagnostic on the Tomcat's main pressure lines. Not because she had been assigned, but because it was what you did when a plane was ready again. From a distance, the name looked like it had always been there. There was no music, no presentation, just the low hum of readiness and the sharp scent of fuel on morning air. Somewhere behind her, another exercise was beginning, but the aircraft in Bay 4 no longer waited for someone to remember it. It had been flown, and now, quietly, it had returned. She was never meant to fly that day. Her name was not on the manifest. Her aircraft was not in the rotation. But when the moment came, she acted not for recognition, not for approval, but because she knew the sky and the sky knew her. While others hesitated, she trusted her training, her instincts and the quiet authority earned through years of being overlooked. This is a story about more than skill. It is about presence without permission, clarity without noise, and the kind of leadership that does not ask to be seen. Astrid did not reclaim her place by force. She reminded them without saying a word why she had never truly left it. What part of her journey resonated with you most? We invite you to share your reflections in the comments. And if stories like this move you, follow for more voices of quiet strength and extraordinary service.